see that. But we're going to move on and talk about the Israeli-Palestinian peace deal. We have to spend a lot of time on the deal. So I could talk about this stuff all night, but we do have to move on to the Israeli-Palestinian peace deal because it is quite comprehensive. Like I said at the top of the show today, we finally got to see the deal of the century. That's what it is being called by this administration. It is a deal that is being pitched by the Trump administration to the Israelis, to the Palestinians, and it's been in the works for a long time. It's been in the works for years. Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of the president, who is a Jewish Zionist, has been hard at work with the Israeli government working on this deal. And it's very important that that is understood, that it was Kushner and the Israeli government that came up with this deal. It wasn't Donald Trump. It wasn't the Secretary of State. It wasn't anybody really in the government. It was Jared Kushner, and it was the Israeli government who came up with this. And they worked on this for years, and they put together 2 phases of an agreement. Phase 1 was released last year, and this was like an economic leg of the deal. I don't know if you remember, it was a year ago. I think it was a little bit before the summer. They laid out basically an investment program that if Palestine agreed to an eventual two-state solution, grand deal of the century, then they would get all these financial investment economic goodies that were laid out last year, which include, I think, $50 billion in investments, and we're going to bring companies there and infrastructure and so on. So phase 1 was released a long time ago, and they had said that they were going to release phase 2 last year, and they didn't. They held off until today. So they released the deal today. It was President Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu at a press conference, and they laid out their whole deal, and I'll read you. This is from CNN, basically a summary of the deal. You would not be surprised to find out that the deal is heavily, heavily biased in favor of Israel. It is almost completely one-sided, and how is that a shocker when it was written by Jared Kushner and Benjamin Netanyahu, right? So I'll read you. This is a report from CNN about the deal. It's pretty comprehensive, so we're going to read through this report. It says, President Donald Trump on Tuesday proposed a Middle East plan that he claimed was a, quote, realistic 2-state solution, but caters to nearly every major Israeli demand and was immediately rejected by Palestinians. It lays the groundwork for Israel to immediately begin annexing all of its settlements in the West Bank with U.S. backing, and also foresees the eventual establishment of a Palestinian state with limited sovereignty after a transition period. Palestinian negotiators have not had direct contact with the Trump administration in more than 2 years. So if you didn't get that straight, the summary of the deal is that it gives Israel basically everything that it wants. It allows Israel to have a blank check in annexing as many settlements as it wants and something like 30% of the West Bank. And in exchange for that, after a transition period, Palestine might be able to get limited sovereignty. Well, hey, sign me up, right? If you're a Palestinian, why aren't you rushing to sign up for that? That sounds like a great deal. You're telling me that after an indefinite transition period, I get to apply for limited sovereignty over my own eternal homeland, and all I have to give up in exchange for that is 30% of the West Bank and everything else that Israel wants, including their capital? Well, what's not to like? It's just totally ridiculous. The article goes on. It says, under the proposal, Trump said Jerusalem will, quote, remain Israel's undivided capital, but that a future Palestinian state would also have a capital in eastern Jerusalem. Trump did not address the question of Palestinian refugees and whether they will have a right of return to their former homes. And he said neither Palestinians nor Israelis would be uprooted from their homes under the plan, which really means that the illegal settlements will remain. When it says, when Trump says neither Palestinians nor Israelis will be uprooted, well, that's because the Palestinians already got uprooted 60 years ago, or what is it now? 1948, 70 years ago. So when you're talking about Palestinians being uprooted, it's a little late for that. It's about 70 years too late for them being uprooted. And, over and over again, over the ensuing decades after Israeli independence, what they really mean when they say nobody's going to be uprooted is that the Israelis who have put down civilian settlements in the West Bank, they will be unperturbed in their illegal settlements. I mean, that's what that really means. It says the plan envisions a Palestinian capital in the Arab neighborhood of Jerusalem on the eastern side of the separation barrier, physically separated from the rest of the city. The plan allows for the Palestinians to call their capital Al-Quds, using the Arabic term for Jerusalem, but includes no significant part of East Jerusalem, and is well short of what the Palestinians would ever accept as their portion of the Holy City. Beyond proposing a new framework for negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians, the Trump plan gives Israel the green light to annex Israeli settlements, regardless of Palestinian support for the plan, but mandates Israel freeze any further settlement expansion for 4 years in exchange for U.S. recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the settlements. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said he will move to take the first steps in annexing West Bank settlements on Sunday. Full Israeli annexation of those territories will make it much more difficult for a future Israeli government to trade off territory with the Palestinians. Trump said the plan would double Palestinian territories, and a map tweeted out by the president also indicated that Israel is prepared to provide swaths of land in the Israeli desert for a future Palestinian state. But ultimately, the plan demands Palestinians give up on claims to nearly 30% of the West Bank. The heavy pro-Israel tilt of Trump's peace proposal was evident in the optics of the unveiling. When Trump presented his administration's long-anticipated proposal to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict at the White House, Netanyahu was at his side, and dozens of right-wing supporters of Israel, including Sheldon Adelson and GOP members of Congress, flanked the podium. So the deal is completely one-sided, and look, I got to tell you, I don't really care about Palestine, and I don't really care about Israel. I don't really care about either of these places, and I'm not like some bleeding heart, liberal when it comes to Palestine. I'm not under any illusions about realpolitik and how geopolitics works and all the dynamics that are at play over there, but let's just be honest about it. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is something that matters to the United States, and the reason it matters is because Palestine is a wedge issue for Arab countries. How we treat Palestine and how we choose to engage with Israel and Palestine determines our relationship with Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, Iran, and the Muslim world at large. If you're looking at terrorists, or if you're looking at heads of governments or heads of militias, the people that have the biggest problem with us in the Middle East, and as such, the people that cause the biggest problems for America and our interests, those people all say that one of their biggest objections to the United States is our blanket, unquestioning, unambiguous support for Israel. That is in Osama bin Laden's fatwas. That was in the World Trade Center in 1994. The guy that did that bombing, that was in his fatwa. That's what all the governments have said in response to this. Iran, Syria, even our allies, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. So it does matter. I don't care so much about, Palestinian rights, and I don't frankly really even care about Israeli security. What I care about is that our intervention in this conflict is one that will help us and not hurt us. When we enter into this conflict on the side of the Israelis, and it's completely unconditional and unquestioning, this harms our relationships with people that should be our allies or people that we could work with, people that blow us up and bomb us, and it shouldn't be that way. We should either not engage at all, or if we do engage, we should do so in such a way that is not going to hurt us or hurt our interests. Now, that's not to say that we can't pick a side in a conflict, but it is to say that when we intervene, we should do so with our own interest in mind, not the interest of whoever we're backing. You see this across the board. It comes to Russia versus the Baltic states. My dog is not with the Baltic states, it's with the United States. My dog in the fight is not Estonia or Ukraine or the Donbass, it's ultimately the United States. And insofar as some countries might benefit us or whatever, then maybe we should help them. But ultimately, it's our country. When it comes to China versus Vietnam or these competing claims in the South China Sea, I don't really care so much about Vietnam's territorial integrity. I don't really care so much about who has sovereignty over these Senkaku Islands, or whatever it is. Senkaku, I don't know what it is. These Chinese islands. I care about intervening in a meaningful way that helps American interests. In the same way, I don't really care so much about who has a right to what plot of desert in Palestine. What I care about is when we intervene in this conflict, we are doing so with our interests in mind. Not Palestine's and not Israel's either. But that's obviously what we're doing, is intervening on the side of Israel, completely on their side with the intention of helping them and no intention of doing anything that's good for us. And that is evident throughout the deal. The main issues that are covered in the deal in the Israeli-Palestinian process are the West Bank borders and settlements, It's the capital, Jerusalem, it's Palestinian refugees, and it is the idea of Palestinian sovereignty versus Israeli security. These are the top 4 issues that are at stake in the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. All of these issues, we are siding with Israel, and we are siding hard with Israel. When it comes to Jerusalem, Palestine's basically cut out of Jerusalem completely. It's Israel's capital, and Israel gets like 90% of it. So in terms of the capital, we're not just on Israel's side, we're all the way on Israel's side. When it comes to the West Bank and other borders, we side with Israel. We say that Israel can have all their illegal settlements, and they can make more settlements. And not only that, but they can occupy 30% more of the West Bank. So we're not just on the side of Israel on the West Bank, we're all the way on the side of Israel on the West Bank. When it comes to refugees, Palestinian refugees who were uprooted in 1948 and expelled from their homes, that's not even addressed. So you could say that we're all the way on the side of the Israelis. And then lastly, when it comes to Israeli security versus Palestinian sovereignty, it's all the way in favor of Israeli security, and there's almost no consideration for Palestinian sovereignty. You know, what's amazing is that in the entire deal, it basically lays out everything that Israel wants is totally covered. When it comes to Palestinian sovereignty and when it comes to refugees, that's all an afterthought, if it's even addressed at all. You know, the refugees are not addressed, and when it comes to Palestinian sovereignty, it doesn't even guarantee that Palestine would get sovereignty. It says that eventually Palestine might get sovereignty. And what would their sovereignty look like? Well, they released a map of what Netanyahu and Jared Kushner have in mind for what Israel and Palestine is going to look like. I'll read you a little bit about the map. It says the map shows a series of Palestinian cantons pockmarked with illegal Israeli settlements marked as enclave communities. One lists 15 such communities, but stresses that the list is not all-inclusive. Commentators already have noted that the map goes nowhere near showing the archipelago effect in reality and shows Palestinian territory to be much more coherent and contiguous than it would be. So if you look at the map, all of the West Bank is basically completely divided. You know, none of it is like, when you think of a country, you think of like a coherent landmass, a contiguous, coherent landmass. You know, like you think of the United States, and you think of, okay, from LA to New York, from Seattle to Miami, you've got America. Well, Palestine is a landlocked country. They have it in mind. The West Bank will be completely surrounded by Israel, and even within Israel, it's not a contiguous country. You've basically got all these little bubbles, all these little separate cities and neighborhoods connected with thin roads, highways, tunnels, things like that. And even within those bubbles, you've got Israeli settlements throughout them. So it's not even within these little bubbles, these tiny enclaves connected by roads and tunnels and so on, you've got throughout all of them these Israeli settlements plopped down right in the middle. It says connecting the various communities are segregated Palestinian and Israeli roads, much like today. These Palestinian roads, however, are labeled major. You know, so the country's connected by little more than slim roads, but, well, they say they're major roads. Some Palestinian areas are linked by bridges and tunnels, the most prominent being one between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. South of Gaza is a high-tech manufacturing industrial area and a residential and agricultural zone. It is not clear if this is intended to be sovereign Israel or part of a future Palestinian state. So even when they say, well, we'll double the size of Palestine, well, they don't really show that. And the part that they do show, south of Gaza, they don't really even demonstrate whether that's going to be Israel or Palestine. It says all routes between Palestinian communities are thin corridors and easily severed. 4 triangles in the map mark strategic sites, presumably Israeli military bases, and they are all either within or adjacent to Palestinian territory. So their idea of a two-state solution is that Israel gets most of the land, and within the land are going to be these tiny neighborhoods, tiny bubbles connected by thin roads of Palestine. And within these tiny bubbles are Israeli military bases and illegal Israeli settlements. Surrounding these bubbles are walls, segregated roads. And, by the way, even better in this deal, is that the Palestinian state would not be entitled ever to have either a military or a paramilitary. And also, at any time, Israel can regain control of Palestine in terms of controlling it through security. So right now, Israel basically occupies Palestine as a security force. It says that they might withdraw, but if they do, they could come back at any point. And that's the deal. So, looking through this deal, it is pretty clear and obvious. Jared Kushner, Benjamin Netanyahu, that they wrote it because they did, right? And the end game of this deal is pretty obvious. It's